Chapter 29. Sweet Tea. Dumb Luck. Donald McMaster once again was blessed by the same absolutely dumb fucking luck that had born him into the world as a white man in the United States of America in 1895. Donnie always felt like he was a pretty blessed fellow. Nothing too bad had ever happened to him, and when he hit bumps in the road, he always felt like his own persistent good fortune eased him through those troublesome moments. None more so than the unfortunate death of that black dancing girl in the rooming house. Donnie honestly could not remember a thing from the night, for the most part. He had been drinking plenty, and good old Harlan Cox had poured high-test gasoline on the fire with all those shared swallows of alcohol from his flask during the naughty little burlesque. Donnie's mama always said the devil was in the drink, and Donnie thought now that she must be right, because he could not figure any way that he, good old Donnie, had actually done the things that it sure seemed like were done to that black dancer girl. He knew from good old Sheriff Coombs that she had been throttled to death. And it seemed as though he had a flash or two of memories and images caught up in his head of squeezing her little neck with both his hands while she punched up at him with her little balled fists and raked at his cheeks like a wildcat. It sure seemed like he could remember a few of those moments. But to Donnie, it did not feel like it was actually him doing the deeds. It must have been his mother's devil in the drink. He hoped. Sometimes he forgot about it all completely. But when those little images popped up out of nowhere, he felt a tiny load of shame rush through him. He capably vanquished those moments and those memories as quickly as they appeared. It had been very sad to hear that his pal, Harlan Cox, passed away that very next morning. When the sheriff came and let him out of the drunk tank, he told Donnie what happened mid-service in the church. It made Donnie very depressed. They had not been friends very long, and it seemed like maybe Harlan was going to become his best friend. But the Reaper intervened, and the morning after Harlan collapsed, Donnie was lugging the casket to the grave, alongside Harlan's little brother, his longtime pals, and Master Richard Cox himself. After the interment, Donnie did his best to pay respects to Master Cox, but the old fellow was so dulled by grief, and Donnie was so generally inarticulate, that neither man actually experienced the handshake and mumbled words of shared sadness that Donnie mustered up. Missy had taken him by the elbow and eased him away from the patriarch, which angered Donnie to no end. When the time came that he needed Master Cox's friendship, he feared it would be nowhere to be found. Donnie blamed Missy's intervention at the wake for that fear. Had he been able to say all that was in his heart about Master Cox's dead eldest son at the funeral, 1 year later when he went to the Cox house to beg a desperately necessary favor, he would not have worried a jot that no was a likely answer. It was definitely entirely Missy's fault. Donnie wondered at the time if he could get away with throttling Missy as he had the black dancer girl, but he realized he probably could not. Missy was a white woman, after all. When Donnie made his first tragic misstep, it all happened too fast for his mind to comprehend until it was too late. They had been at the feed store, he and the missus. While she tried on hats, Donnie got bored. He was perusing shotguns that he needed no more of when he lost sight of her. When he looked around and realized she was nowhere to be seen, he set out to track her down. He found her, staring up at the recruitment poster, weeping loudly. Missy turned and grasped at his shirt front, getting a handful of hair and skin along with it. "You got to go, Donnie. You just got to do it, honey pie." She caressed his cheek, and the tears poured. It was pitiful. "You got to be brave and stand up for this great nation against them awful Huns. I'll be so ashamed if you don't sign up and get in the fight, honey lamb." Now, Missy did not particularly love her country or hate the Germans, nor did she particularly care what happened all the way across the Atlantic Ocean in foreign lands that did not speak a lick of American. But she saw an opportunity, a golden, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, an opportunity to smother Donnie to death with the good old American flag instead of with her goose-down pillow. As her wet, weepy eyes stared up into his, Donnie realized the gauntlet had been thrown down. William Hendricks from the bank and Hap Davies, the feed store proprietor and virtual epicenter of town gossip, were watching from the counter. Jenny Millsap, too, whose husband was a big man around town, stood witness. Donnie knew that if he did not pick the gauntlet up, he would live all the days of his life as a coward in their eyes. His damned wife was making such a fuss and crying and begging and all, right there in the public arena. It was shameful. So a dozen minutes later, they were standing across the table from old Bull Timmons, the day-drunk postmaster. Donnie had his right hand raised, left hand sweating on the Bible, swearing out his faith to the flag before God and Missy and everybody. He actually felt an unexpected thrill of pride as his shaking hand scrawled out his name on the papers. The thrill started in his belly and shook him to his extremities. Most of it was because he was hyperventilating. Thus, Donnie McMaster joined a United States Army that had recently soundly defeated his ancestors. He had joined early, well in advance of many million future doughboys, and all for the love and respect of Missy McMaster, whom he hated. In the weeks leading up to his training date, Donnie got extremely nervous. He began losing sleep about the matter. He alternated between constipation and explosive diarrhea. Donnie was not terrible at reading. It required a lot of his limited concentration, but he could read well enough to know that a lot of European menfolk were getting killed and maimed in France. 1 week before he was due to report, he sought help. Donnie was wringing his hat in his hands to the point of destruction as he waited under the big white columns and portico for an answer to his knock on the front door of the Cox house. He was mustering up to knock again when Isaiah's Aunt Jean opened the door. "Master Cox in?" Donnie mumbled. "Whom shall I say is calling?" Jean asked. "Donald McMaster." Jean paused. She smiled. "Yes, sir. I'll be right back." Donnie stood on the porch for another long pair of minutes. Then the door reopened and Jean was back. "Master Cox is in the midst of some things. He says you could come back in half an hour." Donnie was not sure what to do. It had taken all his courage to get this far. Coming back in half an hour would take reserves of bravery he was not certain he owned. "Or you can come sit in the kitchen," Jean said. "I can make you something to eat while you're waiting, if you like." "No, I ain't hungry," Donnie mumbled. "Well, then maybe a glass of tea. Shame to have to ride all the way back out here in half an hour." Donnie fiddled it over in his head, then nodded. She opened the door wider for him. He entered in. While Donnie sat at the kitchen table, still wearing his hat, Jean got a tall glass down for him. She got the ice pick back out of the utensil drawer and considered stabbing him in the neck with it. She shook off the impulse. Hard to explain that away as some ordinary accident. She used the tongs to pull a small block of harvested ice out of the icebox and expertly picked away at it on the butcher block, dropping the resulting shards into Donnie's glass. She dried her hands on her apron and tried to factor out a method that would work. Poisoning Harlan Cox was easy. Having 3 hours to plot it, gather the means from home, then bring them to bear at breakfast made it a simple affair. This was not that. Her exterior was a calm mask, but her mind was scrambling for a way to use this glass of tea to finish Donnie McMaster and get a final vengeance for her nephew's loss. "You take sugar, Mr. Donnie?" Donnie nodded dumbly. "How many?" Donnie looked up. He had not actually heard her query. "How many sugar dominoes do you take, Mr. Donnie?" "Oh," Donnie shrugged. "I don't know, 4 or 5. Donnie had always had a sweet tooth. Jean nodded. "I just need to step down to the cellar and fill the bowl." Donnie did not reply. Jean took the half-full sugar dish, lit a lamp, and went down into the fruit cellar, closing the door behind her. Jean came down the wooden steps and moved quickly in the cellar's cool, earthy dampness. She dumped crystal sugar dominoes into the dish, then knelt and rifled through the bottom shelf. It only took a moment to find the prize she sought. An unopened box of rough-on-rats arsenic. She broke the seal and liberally sprinkled the sugar dominoes with a topping of the deadly white crystals. It was not perfect, but it would have to do. Jean picked up the lamp and the sugar dish and climbed the steps, ready and steady to do what needed to be done. She opened the door and found that her options had suddenly become limited. James Cox, in his spotless new United States Army uniform, was sitting at the kitchen table next to Donnie. James smiled at Jean and waved. "Hey there, Miss Jean. May I have some sweet tea too?" Jean nodded. "Yes, sir, Mr. James. I'll just be a moment." Jean shut the cellar door and stood on the top stair for a long, long moment. To kill Donnie, she would have to risk killing them both. Donnie on his own might take ill from the arsenic and die halfway across the county. But if James died, or sickened too, in the same span, it would cast suspicion straight on the Cox house, and thus straight on her. In her head she weighed the odds of brazening through Sheriff Coombs bracing her on the matter. She thought she could do it. A breath cleared the tension from her face. She prepared to re-enter the kitchen when her fingers touched the handle. She heard Master Richard Cox enter the kitchen and greet the boys. Her heart skipped a beat as she imagined bringing wrath down on all of them. She knew it would be the lynching of her, and that of her extended family if she did. She knew she could not kill the 3 of them in one fell swoop and walk away scot-free. It only took a moment to dump the poisoned sugar in the cellar's corner where the rats and roaches would feast upon it. A carrion feeder last supper. She refilled the sugar dish with clean sugar dominoes and climbed back up the stairs. In the kitchen, Richard stood over the boys, hands on hips, listening to Donnie. "Well, sir, I just didn't know where else to turn, sir. It all happened in kind of a rush," said Donnie. Richard glanced at Jean. "Make that 3 glasses of tea, Miss Jean." "Yes, sir," said Jean. Richard pulled a chair back and sat down. He folded his fingers together and rested them on the table. "Donnie, as you can see by Junior's attire, he's committed to the Army too, and he's eager to do his bit. Now, I'm excited for him. Hell, if I was a young man, I'd have been lined up right there beside him, swearing my oath to that flag and sweating through the training. I wouldn't have no qualms about killing myself some godless Huns. He winked and confided in the boys. I hear those Parisian jelly rolls are mighty tight, hotter than hell, and wet as the morning dew. Donnie laughed. James had no idea what his father was talking about, but he laughed knowingly too. So honestly, Donnie, even if I could get you free of the arrangement, I think it'd be a good experience for you, same as it will be for Junior. He patted James's knee. And here's the bottom line. He leaned in. I have it on good authority from my friends up in the Capitol that conscription via draft is a-comin'. So even if I pull on them strings, got my fingers on, got you freed of your commitment, there's no surety that I can keep you out of the bramble patch when they start drafting boys up, you see? Donnie scrunched his hat and tried not to appear crestfallen. Yes, sir, I understand, he mumbled. Jean set the tray of iced tea down on the table. Thank you, Miss Jean, said Daddy. He sipped on the tea. Good stuff. Donnie gripped the glass too tightly. He nodded along. He sipped his sweet tea without tasting it. The only thing he tasted now was his own death in a muddy trench in faraway France. Now, said Daddy Cox, there is the one thing I could be able to do for you, Donnie. Now, it ain't a guarantee, and it would mean getting over there to France a wee bit on the early side. Donnie glanced up. You're not wrong to think that I know some folks who can be of assistance. He smiled. How do you feel about motorcycles, Donnie? Donnie shrugged. He had never really thought about it. After Daddy Cox made some telephone calls, Donnie's date got pushed up by a few days. He reported for duty on the required day and got trained up for war at Camp Shelby, named after the traitorous Confederate hero General Joseph Orville Joe Shelby. Donnie ended up loving every minute of it. He found that under duress from superiors and threat from his peers, he could make it through just about anything. Thinking for himself had always been a frustrating experience, one which he had taken out on his dog and his sharecroppers. Donnie found that when all he had to do was follow orders, his mind was much more at ease. He liked playing sports, shooting guns, drinking moonshine, and camping. So the army was a real good fit all around. Plus, he found out he really, really liked motorcycles. Donnie followed in James's path and even exceeded him. Out of training, he made corporal as a motorcycle dispatch rider. He wrote Missy straight away, forgetting that she did not care about his accomplishments, and he did not care what she thought. But it was exciting to be advancing up the chain so quickly, and he felt the urge to share it with someone. In many ways, attaining a corporalcy was the first thing Donnie had ever accomplished on his own. But even that was not entirely the truth. Donnie, in no uncertain terms, owed his motorcycle, the second chevron on his shoulder, and a future of combat-free military experience entirely to Richard Cox's invisible influence. Thus, through Daddy Cox's able machinations, Donnie and James shipped off to France in late February 1917. They were attached to the British Army General Staff and outfitted with Triumph single-cylinder motorbikes. Dispatch riding was the best job ever. Neither would ever have to see a lick of combat. Both boys would return home at the war's end and look like true blue American heroes. Donnie intended to use that resume to get free drinks, back slaps, and hand jobs wherever he could for the remainder of his natural life. James would use it to journey from the Cox plantation to the Mississippi State Legislature, from there to the governorship, from the governorship to who knows where. The sky was the limit. Good Friday scuttled all those dreams to the bottommost depths of the ocean blue. On Good Friday, Donnie had been in gay Paris, motoring dispatches from the British GHQ to the Frenchies when it began. At 11:30, he made a stop for a quick wet of his whistle and a dip of his carrot at the Red Lamp enlisted man's brothel at 106 Avenue des Suffranes. Both the absinthe and the bored girl hit the spot perfectly. High as a kite, he splurged on an extra pint of absinthe for drinks with James and the lads at camp. Then he got back on the road. He was outside of Paris proper by a little after midnight, putting east on the dark roads when his headlight caught sight of it. He braked cautiously as he approached. The image would stick inside him for the remainder of his days, lanced into his retinas, cut there so deep that every time his eyelids closed he saw it, carved like some sadistic bas-relief frieze. He motored toward them slow and steady. There was so much blood, he could not say who belonged to what. The couple, feasting like feral dogs on the chubby man's innards, turned to look at him, their dull eyes catching the motorcycle's yellow beams. Donnie nearly shat himself. He rolled the throttle gently as he passed them, trying to pretend he had not seen it. He nearly dumped the bike when he glanced over his shoulder. The red tail light lit them up. The bloody man and woman stood. They ran after Donnie and his machine. Donnie let out a yelp and looked back to the road just in time to avoid driving into the drainage ditch. He gunned the engine and veered back, nearly spinning out and dropping the bike, but he caught it in time and kept upright. He could not bear to look back again, but he still felt them coming after him. What the shit? What the shit? What the shit? He kept murmuring to himself as he rode, nearly inaudible over the wind in his ears and the engine's little roar. After 20 minutes of running nearly flat out, Donnie throttled back on the long straightaway. He was not interested in stopping, but he also was not interested in crashing, and he knew if he pressed on full tilt, these shitty French roads would jump up and grab him at some point. He threw a cautious look back. Beyond the tail lamp's red ring of light, there was nothing but void. Donnie turned to the road ahead and pressed on. What he had seen, it had to be the absinthe talking. There was no way people were dining al fresco on each other in the road. It seemed highly unlikely. It continued for an hour, without further incident. Time, and the crisp air cleared his head, turning highly unlikely to impossible. He still planned to tell the boys about it at GHQ, but more for a laugh, about the hallucinatory effects of absinthe than anything else. Then the Triumph's little engine stuttered and gulped, running hot and lean. Shit. The full throttle run had devoured his gasoline. Donnie reached down and fumbled the petcock from on to reserve. He knew from experience that he had at most 15 minutes of careful riding before the tank was bone dry. He figured he could make it to the resupply depot at Mervaux if he was extremely conservative. If he was successful, it would be by a cunt hair's breadth. He eased the throttle down even more and limped the bike onward. Almost precisely a quarter of an hour later, 50 yards from his destination, Donnie came into view of the supply depot. As his headlight lit up a bored British sentry at the gate, the engine started stuttering again. It died fast this time. Donnie coasted to a stop, and the little headlight dimmed to black. "Who goes there?" came the sentry's limey voice with its annoying accent out of the darkness. Donnie pulled his goggles down around his neck. "Dispatch rider from a GHQ. I need some gasoline, buddy. Can y'all help me out?" "Stand forth." Donnie smiled to himself. Stand forth. Sometimes it was like these people were not even speaking English. "Yep, I'll be there in a jiffy." Donnie climbed off the Triumph and pulled it back onto its stand. He hustled the final 30-odd yards to the depot, where the sentry was waiting with his rifle at port arms. He turned his little flashlight on Donnie and took in the uniform and the smirk. Easy there, buddy. You're half blinding a fella, said Donny. The sentry was not in the mood. I'm blinding you, mate. You got your bloody headlight on, full beam running in here. How do you know the bloody biplanes and observation blimps don't catch you coming up this road and end up dropping Berthas, Jack Johnsons and Black Mariahs on my fucking head? Donny nodded. Definitely did not seem like these fellows were speaking English a lot of the time. He shrugged, sheepish. Sorry, buddy. I just forgot. I'll keep it off when I head on out. The sentry spat. Fuck's sake, pal. You better. It won't be a bloody Hun you'll need to worry about taking you to task. You understand? A chastened Donny understood. Sure thing, sure thing. Now about that gasoline. The sentry shook his head, disgusted. The fuel lorries just past munitions. Plenty of gas cans back there too. No fucking headlamp on your way out. Understand? Righto. No headlight. Got it. Thank you, buddy. Donny took off his gloves and headed into the depot. Donny meandered through the stacks, past the shining piles of artillery ordnance and gas canisters, until his flashlight found the big green cylindrical tank of the fuel truck. It took a long couple of minutes to search out the gas cans. He found an empty one and lugged it to the hose. When he turned the tap, gas exploded out, drenching his hands and pants. He slammed the tap closed. Goddamn fucking shit, said Donny. He knew he would now reek of gasoline for the next 40 miles. Ah, fucking shit, he repeated. On his second attempt, Donny was nice and gentle with the tap. He filled the can to the brim and shut it off. As he tightened the spout back onto the gas can, he paused. It was sure it heard something in the darkness. Hello? There was no response. Donny shrugged. Dang old absinthe. Seeing and hearing stuff now. Donny picked up the can and headed for the gate. He nodded to the sentry as he passed, but the fellow ignored him, just minding his business, staring out into the dark. Donny reached the Triumph and unscrewed the filler cap. He topped it off and capped it. He turned the petcock to the on position and gave the gas a long moment to flow down and prime the carburetor. Then he advanced the spark and gave the starting lever a kick. The engine hummed straight to life. Donny quickly switched off the headlight with an embarrassed glance back at the sentry, expecting to be cursed at again, but the sentry paid him no more mind. The idol levelled into a perfect thrum, and Donny smiled. He was proud of his motorcycle maintenance skills. Half these British machines ran for shit. Donny's was an exception. When he heard him call out his challenge, he thought the sentry was still talking to him. Who goes there? Donny was about to reply. I do, dummy. I was just talking to you. When he looked up and realized that the sentry was challenging someone else. He had his little flashlight pointed out into the woods and cradled his rifle in the crook of his shoulder. Donny took a few steps in that direction, uncertain what was happening, but intending to take the gas can back at least as far as the gate. He paused a moment to watch whatever was unfolding up there from where he was. Who goes there, mate? The sentry repeated. Stand forth and be recognised. The steady idle of Donny's perfectly tuned motorcycle was the only sound for long seconds. Then, in a rush, a mass of men tore out of the dark and crashed into the sentry. He never even got a shot off before Donny saw the flashlight beam disappear. There was yelling and cursing that turned to a scream, then sounds that did not seem like they could possibly be coming from human beings. Donny dropped the gas can. He stumbled backward. He turned and grabbed the handlebars, threw a leg over the seat, and shoved the bike off the stand. He kicked the stand up to its latch, turned the bar sharply, and gunned the engine, sending a spray of gravel into the air and roaring away. He rode on the edge of control. His heart was pounding. Tears from the wind were pouring from his eyes. He was going dangerously fast. When he got himself back under control, he slowed enough to steer the bike with one hand, while he wrestled his goggles back up into position. Then he pressed on, full throttle ahead. It was dawn. when Donnie finally reached GHQ. The vast field of tents was still smouldering. In the centre of the camp, Donnie putted the motorcycle past where the entire British General Staff was on display, on their bellies, hands bound behind their backs with barbed wire. They had been lined up in their night clothes and beheaded. The headsman himself was lying by a large tree stump that had been used as a chopping board for the task, axe still in hand. The last headless British general was still on his knees, chest atop the stump, his head lumped in somewhere with a mass of 16 others that were stacked in an ugly, haphazard pile. Donnie went numb. He parked his motorcycle at the motor pool with the other vehicles. He made his way past bloody bodies until he reached his tent. With no sign of James or the other boys to be found, Donnie collapsed on his cot and willed it all to be a terrible, terrible dream. When he woke up 6 hours later, nothing had changed. Donnie's hands shook miserably as he refueled. He rummaged through his saddlebag. He pulled out the absinthe bottle and hurled it into the trees. Then he climbed on board, started the machine, and hit the road running. 2 days later, Rupert Fuchs was leading the way when they heard something coming up behind them. They all looked back and saw, 100 yards distant, a dirty Triumph motorcycle coming into view. When the rider saw the troop, he eased to a stop. Rupert, Wolfgang, Jonah, and Adolf all halted too. Jonah Unger waved. The motorcycle rider gave a half-hearted wave back. "Y'all are alive, right?" the rider hollered. Wolfgang understood Donnie's English. "Yes, we are alive. For now." The motorcyclist let out the clutch and rode toward them slowly. He stopped 10 feet away. He pulled off his goggles and cut the engine. He started crying. "Sweet Jesus, y'all the first living people I've seen in 2 days," said Donnie McMaster, as hot tears streamed down his filthy cheeks. "Y'all are Germans?" Wolfgang nodded. "Yes, I'm Wolfgang." He pointed to his compatriots. "Jonah, Adolf, and Rupert. They do not speak English." Donnie nodded. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Donald. Where y'all going?" Wolfgang paused a moment. He looked to the east and chewed on his lip. To Donnie's surprise, a harsh, quiet laugh burst out of him. "Home, Donald. We are going home." "Where are you going?" Donnie was not quite sure what to make of that. The fellow seemed a little crazy, talking like that. He thought about his own home and all that came with it. He was not certain that going home was all that appealing. Donnie smudged away the tears and regained control of himself. He shrugged. "I can't rightly say. Just now I'm looking for some gasoline." He shook the bike sideways, and the remains of fuel sloshing back and forth in response could be heard. "Running toward empty. Pretty soon now. Y'all got any stashes around here?" Wolfgang turned to Rupert. "Sergeant, he's looking for petrol. Do you know of any nearby?" "No, sir. The nearest depots are at St. Quentin, off the canal near Riqueval, in the tunnel itself," Rupert replied. Wolfgang translated. "It says there may be stockpiles at St. Quentin. That is our destination as well." Donnie nodded. "Where's this San Quentin at?" "I believe this road would take you there." Donnie considered. "Well, okay then. Appreciate the information. I guess I will just keep pushing on then. Y'all take care." Donnie kick-started the bike. He revved it and let it settle to a smooth idle. He gave a small wave, then clutched, throttled up, and motored away. The Germans watched him disappear down the road, then continued in the path that his tire tracks laid behind him.